I'm sitting.
Okay, welcome to the High Point Museum Ask a Curator Day. This is our first Facebook Live, and we hope you're all going to join us today. I'm Teresa Laughlin. I'm the Public Relations Director for the High Point Museum, and we're glad everyone is here. We hope we get some people asking us lots of questions. We're going to start today with Edith Brady, who is the Director of the High Point Museum. We also have with us Marian Inabinett, the Curator of Collections, and Sara Blanchett, the Curator of Education. So we're going to start today with Edith, and she's going to answer our first question, which is how High Point got its name.
Okay, well, this is a good one. High Point, of course, got its name from the railroad here in High Point when they were doing the survey of the North Carolina Railroad that originally stretched from about Goldsboro to Greensboro and then eventually went on down to Charlotte. This point where it crossed the Plank Road here, it's now the center of our downtown, was surveyed as the highest point on the North Carolina Railroad. So it's not necessarily the highest point in High Point or necessarily even the highest point in the Triad, but that place where Main Street and the Plank, which was the Plank Road, and the railroad intersected was the highest point on the railroad survey. And it was at the time surveyed to be 943 feet above sea level. So that's how we got our name.
That sounds great. Thank you. All right, Marian, your turn. What do curators wear?
Oh, that's a great question. I wear, as you can see, a lab coat a lot. And part of the reason why I wear that is because it protects me from the dust and dirt of our artifacts and our storage areas. And it also protects the objects or whatever I'm working with from my clothing, and especially buttons and snaps and zippers and things. So we don't want anything to snag or scratch. I like a lab coat myself because it has pockets, which allows me to keep all my other stuff, which is gloves and a mask. And I know everybody sort of now thinks about these as PPE, but we've collections people have pretty much always worn gloves and sometimes masks. I mean, when you're cleaning and vacuuming dirty things, we need a mask, but we usually use gloves, and it's not really to protect us, but it's to protect the object so that we don't get the dirt and oils in our hands, because no matter how much we wash them, they're going to be that might transfer to the object, especially some objects like documents and photographs you really don't want to handle with your bare hands. So that's what curators wear.
All right, Sara, you're up.
All right.
If you weren't a curator, what job would you be doing?
I come from a family who really believes in service, so I would probably be an officer in the Navy. That's actually something that I was researching and starting to begin the process until I got this job. So it was either this or the Navy, and I chose to be here in High Point with all of you fine folk instead of being out at sea with a whole bunch of people.
All right. Okay, well, we have a question on Facebook, and they want to know, what is an example of curation in popular culture?
Well, I think one example, I know the word curate gets thrown around a lot, and a lot of people don't really necessarily understand what that word means. And it's constantly being redefined anyway. But the best example I can come up with, for example, I was trying to throw a baby shower for one of my best friends right at the beginning of COVID and the pandemic. And I was in charge of the music. So I was in charge of curating everyone's musical experience. So being the person that I am, I chose music that had the word baby in it. So it's really interesting from, baby got back to, so I'm happy that the baby shower didn't happen, because it would have been a really interesting experience. But that's the best example I can come up with right now about curation for pop culture, curating music, curating movies, a common theme, a common subject, that you can use to enhance your experience.
I mean, if you think about online shopping, a lot of the websites, when they're advertising, or these companies that sell online, they'll say, you know, especially curated for this particular type of company, customer. And that's really all they're saying, is they're selecting things from a wide variety of items that has, like Sara said, a common theme or a common idea, and it's geared towards a certain person. So you could say that that's sort of what we do, is we take a lot of stuff and bring it down and, you know, kind of pick and choose what's going to best reflect an idea or a theme that we're trying to do here at the museum.
And another thing that a lot of people engage in is, of course, Pinterest. Pinterest is a great example of curating. You're curating your own boards around whatever themes that you come up with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, another question. What is the coolest historical object you have come in contact with?
Oh.
Who wants to start?
It's hard when you ask for these superlatives.
Yeah. I will have to say, this was a question that we were thinking that we would get, with people asking what was our oldest object, and it sort of put me in mind. And honestly, we do have some American Indian artifacts that are thousands of years old, and some of that is just, you just think about that, and that is just really, really cool. And what is equally cool is some of them were found here at the museum when they were developing the historic part. So you think there were American Indians, utilizing this area and not really settling, but using this area 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Some of the things that they found were from the Archaic period, which is, I think, 6,000 to 1,000 BC. So, I mean, I was thinking about this in a totally different way, but thinking about it now, it's like, that's really cool. We also have an dress that was miscatalogued. And we have documentation on it, but it was, I don't think when it was accepted years and years ago, that whoever donated it really didn't even know what it was. But it's from 1847, and it's a really nice dress. And I'm trying to do some more research into it. But that's one of those things, is the woman's dresses from that period, and it's not a fancy dress. I mean, it's a sort of day dress, really don't survive. And I just kind of sit there and go, this is great. So to me, that's a really cool artifact.
I love a good historic building.
Yeah.
So I love being in the park, which is part of my job. So being as historically accurate as possible. I love going inside historic buildings. Right now I'm in Little Red Schoolhouse, and that's from 1930. And we have buildings from 1786 and 1802. And so I love a good historic building, because you're literally stepping from the 21st century back in time. And you can see different objects that are set up that you can contextualize in your own life. Oh, that's how they make butter. Well, this is how I get butter. So how do they connect? And being inside a historic building really makes you think about how you use things in your life, and makes you think about how things have either evolved or devolved in historical context.
Edith, you have anything?
I don't know. It's like I said, it's hard for me to pick like one thing, or there's so many. Every object has its own story, and I think that's what you connect with, or the different stories that are throughout. I don't know. I guess some of the letters that we have, relating to the military, and both the ones of people writing to people overseas and people writing home, I think are always interesting to kind of see what is on people's minds. I guess I like a lot of the documents, just because there's so much story that's the personality, I guess, that comes out in those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we find and decide what we're going to bring into the museum? How do we add to our collection, and who makes the final decision on that, and how we decide about exhibits? So let's talk about just how the process, I guess we'll start with you, Marian, since you're the one really in charge of that part.
Yay. What most of the time happens is people call us and they have objects that they feel like they don't want to get rid of, or they think has importance, and they call us about it. It goes through a process with an acquisitions committee, and we really look at whether the condition, how significant is it? Do we already have 3 or 4 of them? Some of those things are criteria that we look at. But we try and make sure that it has a high point story. So it's just not an example of, an early American spoon, but that it was made in High Point, used by somebody in High Point, tells a High Point story. So that's really kind of how we decide that. And then other things, we as a staff look around, and also our historical society members look around and they say, that's important. That's important to High Point today, or High Point now, or and suggest that we collect it, or that we ask whoever is the owner of it to donate it. So that's kind of the process. But it's not just us. There's a acquisitions committee, and many of them, all of them, have a very deep High Point connections, and they really help us understand how these objects are important, and to the full story of High Point, not just a very narrow focus. Edith, you've been around a little longer. You want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, and I think we are a community museum. We were founded by High Pointers to be about High Pointers for High Pointers. So, our objects come from the community. And while there are sometimes things that we think of, oh, this is really important, and we want to go seek them out, a lot of what comes in, really is just what community members feel like is something that's important to be here. And sometimes things come in that we don't know anything about. It's a representative story or a whole, something that we really weren't aware of until the object came in. So, this museum is really defined by the community. It has been from the beginning. And, we don't purchase artifacts very often either. That's something I know sometimes people think, oh, you purchase things, we're different than an art museum in that sense. There's not a huge market also for a lot of the things that we collect. Many of the things in our collection don't have really necessarily a monetary value. It's more because of what they meant to this community. So it's something that maybe look pretty humble on the surface until you unwrap, what the story around it is. So there are a few items in our collection that we purchased, most notably the John Coltrane piano that we raised the funds from the community to purchase from an auction a number of years ago. But those are pretty rare instances. Most of what we bring in is really just curated in some ways by the community.
Yeah. For education, it's a tiny bit different, only because it either community members either seek out myself or Edith, and they ask if this toy or furniture or anything can be used, and if it can, then we'll bring it on. But if not, then we'll either send them to Marian or not. And Marian, made the accession things from the collections and asked, will education need this? And what I use those donations for Little Red, for school programs, for our park programs. Mm-hmm. I keep that aside for future programs that might pop up that we have no idea that we'd actually need until, oh yeah, I remember we have this donated thing that we can actually use for this, and we can create a program out of it. Mm-hmm. So it's usually just people asking and us saying yes or no.
Mm-hmm. All right. So our next question is probably start with you, Edith, but what has the museum been doing during this pandemic, but also how we're documenting COVID-19?
Okay, the motion just stopped.
Oh, no.
Marian might have to take over this. Okay, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, it was so loud.
Okay, I'm sorry. What is being done? What are we as the museum doing during COVID? What have we been doing, and then how are we documenting it?
Sure. Well, of course, we've been doing a lot of things during COVID. In terms of reaching our audience, we've been looking at new ways of reaching things like this, doing a lot of video content, adding things to our online presence, to our social media, our website. But in terms of collecting, of course, we've stopped taking stuff in immediately during the pandemic, and I'll let Marian speak more to that. But we are actively searching for stories and artifacts and things related, of course, to this COVID-19 experience. And we've set up our High Point COVID-19 Experience Project, which started initially with a Facebook group, which you can join if you haven't already. And we invite anybody to just share anything you're seeing. They could be your own posts. You can share posts from other places, things that you see that you think are important to this event that will help us figure out what it is that we need to be collecting. It's also creating a little bit of a timeline for us in that Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook, people who aren't can also submit things through our website. We have a page there where people can submit stories, or if they have something they think should be donated to the museum eventually, they can note that, or if they know somebody we need to interview, they can tell us that as well. We've started doing some interviews with different people representing all kinds of different experiences and things that are happening in the pandemic, and those will be sharing more and more as we're getting those finished and edited and sharing those online. But I'm going to let Marian talk more about the specific artifacts that we're looking for and how we're dealing with that.
Yeah. We have been accepting a few artifacts, ones that were kind of used in the moment, and we felt like they would be thrown away if we didn't go ahead and accept them. But we, for health and safety reasons, we've not been accepting a lot of items as we normally do. And so we've been looking around at things and contacting various companies and people, or people will give us a call. And so, but what we're really looking at is what, like Edith said, things that really reflect everyone's experience of individual experience. But we've also collected some things like, the drive-through, curbside service from one of the restaurants, because that was a big deal. I mean, all of a sudden, nobody could go to the restaurants, but these restaurants were making it work by providing curbside and other ways to stay in business. We've also collected, we had a few companies here to sort of shift gears and do PPE for the pandemic. And so we collected a few of those items just to reflect how the companies who may have been making something totally different shifted gears to meet the market and the need. So that's kind of what we're looking at. It was really interesting that, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic in March, when people were starting to reflect on the Spanish flu epidemic of 1917, 18, 19, 20, and they began to think about that. And we looked in our collection, and we don't have anything. I mean, we don't have anything. And so we felt like, we really needed to, since this really caused so much disruption in everybody's life, and it's going to be something that people talk about, just like we talk about the epidemic from 1917, 1918. And, that we need to start collecting some stuff and show how it really affected people's individual lives, and not just the community in general, but just individually because that's going to connect with people 50 years from now.
All right, thank you. All right, Sarah, we'll go to you. We'll ask you a fun question.
Okay.
What's your favorite film?
So I have two. My first one, I'm a very big Disney fan. So my favorite film, Disney film, is Sleeping Beauty. Mainly because the villain is my spirit animal.
You're gonna say that.
And my second all-time favorite film is Titanic. I'm a big fan of Titanic. I love the history, even though it's a tragedy. It's a big tragedy. I enjoy the drama, the cinematography, et cetera, but I do love the history. I have a lot of books about Titanic. Saw the Titanic costumes when they were built in our house.
Mm-hmm.
I even have a little tea tanic that is actually a tea infuser that you can put in your tea and it just bobs up and down in your mug. So crass, but I love it. So yes, that's my two favorite films of all time.
Okay. Marian, what is a question that you get asked a lot about High Point?
I tell you, I think the number one thing we get asked, and it's almost a weekly occurrence, we get phone calls or emails from people who have High Point furniture. And they want to know more about that piece of furniture. They either want to know when it was made, they need to know about the company, all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of times that information is really not available. We can tell you about the company. Usually, we've got information about the company and when it was, who founded it, and we might even have a picture of the factory. But knowing I think people think we have catalog from these companies, and we don't. But we do the best we can, and it's not unusual because High Point, especially between 1900 and 1950, was making furniture by, sending it out by the trainload. And so it's not unusual that, people in California, Seattle, Texas, we get calls from all over asking us about High Point furniture. So it's not unusual. And most of the time I can kind of give them a ballpark of when it was made. I can tell them about the company. But we do ask them to send in photographs if they can of their furniture, of the label or something like that. So we can build a little library for the next time the person calls. Somebody else calls, and we can say, oh, but this lady out in, Seattle has a bed that looks just like it, and she thinks her grandmother bought it in 1910. So it looks like 1910. So yeah, we'll go with that. So we can help them a little bit.
All right, Edith, we'll go to you for a second. Someone wants to know how many people pre-COVID visited the museum annually.
And it varies a lot, and I hope you all can hear me over the mowing. It's very unfortunate timing. It's live. What do you do? It varies. We're usually around 15,000 people a year, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 that visited on site. However, what we have been seeing in recent years, probably the last, 5 to 7 years, an increasing number of people using our online resources. So actually, when you look at people who are using our materials virtually, that number almost doubles. It's been more like 25,000 or so people that we've been serving. So we're seeing that museums are evolving just like everything else. Libraries have changed a lot, over time. It used to be only books that you would go there and do. And of course, now libraries do all kinds of other things and meet people's needs in many different ways. And we see that same thing happening with museums. As we're able to digitize more and more of our materials, we're able to get them online, and people can visit them and research them and look at them without even coming to the museum, which is great because, of course, we always want people to come to the museum, but we have so many more artifacts than we could ever display at one time. You literally could not put them all out in the space that we have in a way that people could actually see them. So our digital audiences are great, and we love that we have this new way that we can reach people. So now we have to rethink about how we measure our audiences and who our audience is, but that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay, has High Point always been known for furniture, or do we have any other big industries in town?
We do.
Go ahead, Edith. Go ahead, Edith.
We do have some other interesting. We have been known for furniture almost since the beginning because, High Point as a town didn't really get started. I mean, was technically founded in 1859 on the eve of the Civil War, but didn't really get moving as, a center of activity until afterwards during Reconstruction and beyond. And so our factory started up in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And of course, furniture has consistently been around, but another big industry that we had for a long time, of course, was hosiery. And textiles generally. It wasn't only hosiery. Hosiery was sort of the biggest component of the textile industry. But that was a huge, huge industry. We still see, of course, remnants of that around today. And of course, we still have some hosiery companies happening or going in High Point. Harrison Covington, of course, is this year celebrating their 100th anniversary. So they're still here making stuff. But Adams Millis, which was the big one, that grew to be, one of the largest sock producing companies in the world, was homegrown here in High Point. So that's a big industry. And of course, agriculture, that's something that we forget about now because it's not as big here in the beginning of the 21st century, but for a very long time, agriculture was a big part of the economy in this area.
Okay, and this, what is the favorite exhibit of our visitors, our permanent exhibits?
So in the permanent exhibits?
Well, I know currently, just from my perspective, I know Meredith Miniatures, the miniature rooms is very popular, but then our furniture exhibit is also another popular one because we are the furniture industry. But Sarah alluded to it earlier just about the historical park. Sarah, you want to talk about the park for a second?
Sure. So we have 3 buildings, now 4 if you include Little Red Schoolhouse. We have an example of a Quaker house, Hoggett house. We have a blacksmith shop where we actually have a costumed interpreter, knock on wood, actually inside the building and dressed in costume, doing blacksmithing. And then we have Haley House, which is the oldest building in Guilford County, and of course Little Red Schoolhouse. All of them you can have a tour, go inside, or at least stay outside and interact with the interpreter. And my job as an education curator is to curate your educational experience about the historic park and to provide my interpreters with the information to relay to the public and to essentially have you step into another time period, but realize that there are things that have crossed over into the 21st century. Like I said, I enjoy a good historic house, so I'm in the buildings often enough to make sure that things haven't moved, or if they moved, I mean relocated to someone's house, or have been moved around from tours, because we do handle objects trying to emphasize a point. Those houses are important, and we try to emphasize points in our core exhibit so that people can take the information they've learned in the park, they visit the park first, and they go inside and they realize that things have crossed over outside, inside, and vice versa. So the historic part, I think, is very interesting, and I try and hope that you, the visitors, have enjoyed yourselves, but also have come away learning at least one thing.
Okay, the last question, real quick. Actually, I don't think we're going to have time for a last question. So, but one of the things, and we'll get to all the questions on Facebook and answer them. But I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is our first time doing a live event, and we're planning more events as the fall goes on and trying new things. So continue to watch us on social media and our website, and keep sending us questions all day. It's Ask a Curator Day on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So please check us out, and thanks for your support. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate your support, guys.